Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Today I Learned Climate, the climate change podcast from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I'm Laur Hesse Fisher, and I can't believe that this is going to be the last time that I ever utter those words. Yes, I am leaving the show. Very sad to do that. It has been a wonderful, remarkable experience being here and creating the show with my wonderful team. And at the same time, I'm really excited to share what is coming up next for TILclimate, because it certainly is not going away. So on this episode, what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about the secret sauce of how we make the show and what makes it special. We're going to talk a little bit about some new things that are going to change with the upcoming season. But first, it is my distinct pleasure and honor to introduce to you Madison Goldberg. Madison is going to be the new host of Today I Learned Climate. Madison, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's such an honor to be here. I'm really excited.
So we're going to get a huge opportunity to get to know you and your background. You are no stranger to science communication. You have a degree in Earth and Planetary Sciences from our dear friends down the road, as well as in journalism. And you have worked on the Scientific American podcast and on Living on Earth and that show. And also you've done deep reporting on environmental issues in Pennsylvania. So you have so much to bring to this conversation. Let's start off. I want to ask you, what sparked your fire for science communication?
Yeah. I had what I think is not an uncommon path into science communication, where I started in science. I studied in undergrad, I studied Earth and Planetary Sciences, as you mentioned. And I adored it. I worked with amazing people. I did, earth science research, and it was awesome. But I realized that I think the parts of it when I was just really fired up and in my element were not necessarily, in the lab per se, but when I was, at a big earth science conference in the giant poster halls where everyone has their posters out and going around and learning from people, learning about their research. I also have this very vivid memory of before one of those conferences, I had made my big poster and it was spread out on the table and my grandparents were visiting. And I distinctly remember the joy that came from explaining to them what I was doing and them at least pretending to be interested. Yeah. And that was fantastic. And, from there, it was just, I was really lucky to have folks who encouraged me to keep exploring it, and both in science and in writing and journalism. So,
I love that. And you chose audio as a way to express and kind of do your science communication. What do you love about the medium of audio?
Yeah. At the risk of sounding obvious, you hear people and their voices. And I think that's really special. On TILclimate, you hear from scientists in their own voices. I think you can really hear when someone gets animated. And especially now that we have so many people who are deploying climate solutions in the field and their communities, getting to talk to them, I think is really, really special. And I think it makes it tangible, hopefully, for listeners in a special way.
That is absolutely why we prioritized having this as a podcast, because we wanted people to feel a closer connection to the science. Mm-hmm. I mean, you read about it, you see reports, you see statistics and graphs. It feels very distant and kind of abstract. And so this is a way to hear the stories and the interests and the words specifically from scientists and kind of personify them a little bit more than you get to do in a more traditional way that science is communicated and climate change science is communicated these days.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that personality aspect is crucial. And I'd love to hear a bit about how you've gone about that, how you've thought about how to cultivate that personality of the show.
So thank you. So we built the show for people who were curious about climate change already. Maybe they were new to climate change because of a job, or maybe they were confused by lots of different things that they hear about on the news, and they just wanted someone to provide a kind of signal through the noise of what was going on, simple, clear explanations. I feel like as the host, I get to be curious on behalf of the audience, right? We have the scientists that are there. I get the honor to be able to ask them all my questions. And then I have to figure out how to distill that down to the most basic key things that our audience needs to know. Let me give you one example.
Yeah, please.
So one of our first episodes was with Professor Carrie Emanuel, and we were working on a show on hurricanes. And what I learned is that the way that hurricanes form in an ocean is actually really complicated. And then we were wrestling with this, how do we deal with this? And then we realized the thing that we need to communicate here is not all the mechanics of how a hurricane starts, but the fact is that a warmer air means a warmer ocean. Warmer ocean has more energy that basically creates more energy inside of a hurricane. And the hurricane like absorbs more of that energy, and that's why it's more intense. We don't need to get more complicated than that.
Yeah.
So what we always try to do with all of our shows is take the topic and kind of distill it down to something that feels memorable and simple and crisp for people to remember.
Yeah. Yeah, that actually reminds me, you mentioned that I was fortunate to do a fellowship in Pennsylvania reporting on environmental issues. One of my very first assignments was something that this reminded me of. And, we made these very short radio spots sometimes that, you just have to be snappy. They have to be within the window of time that you have. And so I was supposed to make an explainer about climate models.
Oh, boy.
Yes, and under a minute.
Oh, gosh.
So it was honestly, I'm so glad that it was my first assignment because it was an incredible challenge. My editor and my other colleagues there helped me so much. I think it was this amazing exercise in forcing yourself to think about, there's a million different directions that I could go here. Climate models are obviously an immensely complicated area, but there are certain things that I think that serve people who are hearing it as they're driving, and other things that probably aren't that useful that to them in that moment that they can figure out if they want to go and learn more. So
what I loved about what you said is that you provided that explainer as a springboard.
Yes.
Right? So it's like, okay, let's give people exactly what they need to know to understand why it's relevant for me or why I could care about this or should care about this. Maybe they're satisfied with that, but maybe actually it's a step towards a deeper dive with a sort of basic level of understanding. And I think that's a really valuable and important role of science communication.
Yeah, totally. And on this idea of like making things memorable, I think, you kind of mentioned like, okay, so how can we get to people and how can we sort of find these ways of putting it that help it stick? Like, I know that's something that you guys have thought a lot about, and you've thought about, different metaphors you can use or things like that. Like, how do you think about that?
Yeah. So one of my favorite metaphors that was introduced on the show was our direct air capture episode. So this is the idea of, okay, there's all this carbon dioxide in the air. Can't we just suck it out, right? And like put it somewhere, do something with it. So Professor Niall McDowell was our guest speaker, and he introduced this metaphor of like, imagine like the molecules of oxygen and nitrogen and CO2 and all the other stuff that's in the air, the gases that are in the air are marbles. And everything that isn't CO2 is blue and CO2 is red. And we're talking about CO2 is about 420 parts per million, right? So we're talking about, if there are a million blue marbles in the sky, then 400 of them about are red. And if you're trying to sort through all of those marbles and just pull out the red ones, well, that's actually really hard to do. And it ends up that it's really energy intensive to do as well. And so just that visual of like, oh my gosh, okay, I can kind of get a sense of why direct air capture is so expensive, so energy intensive, so hard. I think that visual really helps. And I've used that in explaining direct air capture to other people as well. And it's been pretty effective.
Yeah, it's effective for me. I mean, that's awesome. Putting a picture in people's heads and these sorts of metaphors, I think, are really important in the same way that, audio demands a lot of strategies, I think, of science communication that maybe different ones are needed elsewhere. So part of what this stems from is that a lot of people, when they're listening to a podcast, they're doing something else. Like, that's what I'm doing. Like, I'm, driving or doing the dishes or doing laundry. Yep, that's the that's the classic. And so because of that, and because, I think it's just a different thing to expect someone to rewind, as opposed to like scrolling back up and rereading something. It goes by fast, and it can be easy to have, and very understandable to have like half your brain on it and half of your brain on something else. So I think these structures, something like, this is what we're going to talk about today, or wait, let's make sure we caught that, and repeating it, or at the end being like, this is where we went on our journey. I think those things are really important, and I think that's something that on the show you've done a great job of, and it's been great. Yeah,
I can't take credit for that. That is Dave Lishansky, our brilliant audio producer. He is a genius. I know you've had a chance to work with him,
yes.
And everybody who's listening to this episode has had the privilege of being able to listen to his talent. He has a natural sense of how people listen and like when people need mental breaks and he always has said, and I'm looking at him because we have a video, we have a video of him right over there over Zoom. And you've always said, Dave, that podcasting is a visual medium. And it is, because we have these imaginations, and as we're hearing, we're imagining what we're thinking and what we're hearing in our minds. And of course, it forms for different people, and we have to carry people along, like what you said. So another part of bringing listeners along on the story is a lot about trust. Because one of the benefits, of course, is we're from MIT, so we have an incredible cadre of researchers and people that we can pull from for the show that brings a sense of credibility. But then also, we don't expect our listeners to take what we say for granted. We come with a lot of curiosity. We also try to come with a lot of skepticism. And what I mean by that is a scientist is naturally skeptical. I mean, you're a scientist, right? And the journalists are also naturally skeptical. And so they're trying to not take things at face value. So in addition to explaining kind of what folks know about, what scientists know about climate change, we also try to communicate how they know what they know. So one of my favorite episodes was TIL about planting trees. And the whole concept is like, well, can't we just plant a whole lot of trees? And like, if not, why not? And all of that. And so we took at it like, okay, let's actually get genuinely curious about that. And as part of that episode, we looked at, oh my gosh, we had to talk about science communication. First, we had to start with like, okay, well, we have to explain how trees take up carbon and then emit carbon, right? Like I'm looking at Aaron Krol, our executive producer and writer for the show, where we just spent a long time. I remember you and I spent a long time figuring that out and redoing the calculations. And oh my gosh, it was a whole thing. Anyway, so we had to explain that part and then explain how it works like inside of a tree. And then we realized, well, we're not really talking about trees. We're talking about forests, right? Because like that's the scale that we're talking about here. And so when you want to measure the carbon dioxide in uptake and release in a forest, there are like these radio towers that can like use sensors and like, measure the airflow, and there are all these calculations. So we're explaining how that works. But as we're explaining how that works, we're also demonstrating like, okay, we know these things, but we don't know them perfectly. So it's like, we hope that by explaining how things happen, it also elucidates like some of the challenges that exist in trying to deal with climate change.
Totally. And so we're talking a lot about sort of these ideas of how to communicate the science and the nitty-gritty of that stuff. But obviously, I know a big focus for you in creating this show is also a focus on the solutions.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I think, and I have a lot of empathy for this feeling. I think it's very easy to feel doomed and to feel scared and to feel overwhelmed by the prospect of climate change. And, is it too late to do anything? What do we even do? Like, I think that's a totally understandable feeling. And something that I've really appreciated about the tone that you've created on the show is I tend to leave the episodes feeling more motivated, more like a sense of efficacy, a sense of possibility. And I'd love to hear like sort of, you've been working on this show for many years, how you sort of molded that, how you thought about that.
Man, I'm so thankful and grateful that you get that impression from listening to the show. It's definitely something that we prioritize. I don't feel doomed about climate change. And I've thought a lot about why that is. And I think a lot of it is because I do this work. And I am connected with so very many people, smart, committed, authentic, hardworking people, like thousands and thousands and thousands. And if you look at the global climate community, millions who are working strategically on this issue. So I don't feel alone. And of course, I'm concerned. I'm very concerned. We need to take action. But I think that feeling of you said motivation, agency, and being a part of something shifts the way that you interact with the problem. And that's part of what we want to bring to the show. Because the fact is, we have a lot of agency. There is a toolkit, a tool belt of solutions that need to be employed. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and there's a lot of work that can be done. And so in every episode, we really try to focus on, okay, where is the sense of agency? What are the things that are holding back progress, but then can actually be done to move things forward? And I'm just thankful that we've been able to figure out a way to do that. Yeah,
so on this sense of agency and efficacy that you've tried to cultivate, how do you go about that? What does that look like in the show? What has it looked like thus far?
Yes, the reason why I sighed is because it's something that we thought a lot about, and we've really wrestled with this topic because we know this is not a what I can do about climate change show.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, a lot of people are wondering, what do I do about climate change?
Mm-hmm.
And we tackled this in an episode. So the point that we try to emphasize in the show is that climate change is a systems problem.
Mm-hmm.
And one individual is inside of a system. And so we need a systems change solution to this problem. Okay, that sounds very technical. It's very MIT. What does that even mean? It just means that these things are big and complicated. So in that episode, we encouraged people, instead of asking, what can I do? To ask, what can I influence? What communities are they a part of that they can shift something there? Are there faith groups that have buildings and infrastructure where they can shape things? Are there nonprofit organizations that they're a part of that maybe could do advocacy work? What are they inside of a corporate infrastructure or a legal infrastructure where they could shift systems? Like that's the kind of work that really needs to happen in order to deal with the systemic issue. So in all of our episodes, we try to frame it through that lens. Like, let me give you an example. We worked on an episode recently, you were involved in this episode, called The Great Indoors, where we talked about buildings. And so we could have just focused on, okay, what are the steps that everybody needs to do to kind of retrofit their homes and have better energy efficiency and save money and blah, blah, blah. We did talk about that, but we didn't just talk about that, right? We also talked about the larger issue of like, okay, you can retrofit your own home, but how is a city, a state, a country retrofit an old building stock, like existing building stock? And then what do we need to do? What do we need to do on setting new building codes and new kinds of standards so that new buildings that get built abide by like certain kind of energy efficiency, So we can't just stop at the individual level. We really want people to be thinking of the larger picture. And part of it is we know that they're all different people of all different walks of life who are listening to this show. We know that we have city planners and former mayors and policy staffers and people who have, set procedural guidelines in their corporate infrastructure. Like we know that people are listening to the show and everybody has something that they can influence. So we really try to frame it so people can find themselves as best as we can inside of that context.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because a concept that has greatly resonated with me as I've learned more about climate communication is one that, there's a scientist and climate communicator who I really, really admire, Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson, and she talks about this concept of a climate action Venn diagram. So thinking about, what am I good at? What are the things that need to be done and what brings me joy? She talks about finding the intersection of those things. And I think that gets to this idea of what are things that I can do based on the networks, the communities that I'm a part of, and as she mentions, it's important that it brings you joy because that's something that you can keep doing, and hopefully will derive satisfaction and fulfillment and purpose from. That really stuck with me. And so when I heard that episode that you mentioned, TIL, What I Can Do, which focused on this sort of framework, I really appreciated that. And I think going forward in the show, I hope that's something that we can maintain.
Well, speaking of which,
yes.
So, I mean, what we talked about today are, like the principles and the elements of the show that has made it the show that it is today. And when you came on board, I'm really excited for you to keep championing that. And you have such an interesting background and it's like such interesting skill set. And I've heard rumblings that there are going to be some new elements to the show to take it to the next level. Can you give us any sneak peeks about this?
Yeah, well, I think something that I have experience with and that is one of my favorite parts of doing this kind of work is going out in the field and talking to people, field reporting, specifically field audio reporting. Speaking of things that bring one joy, this brings me a good deal of joy. And it's something that I'm really excited to hopefully incorporate a bit more of in the show, in addition to sort of the sit-down interviews that listeners are used to. Climate solutions are being deployed now. And I think the chance to hear from people who are both working on those solutions and working on the research, that underpins them and whatnot, I think hopefully can make things tangible for listeners. And so that's one thing, is this sort of on the ground look. And actually, I had a chance recently to go out with some researchers from MIT who are doing some field work down on Cape Cod in a marsh there. You spoke about how trees and other vegetation stores carbon. And so they are doing research in that realm. Yeah, and I'm really excited to weave that into the show going forward. And then I think just this sense of momentum, this sense of possibility that you've talked about, that's something that I really, really will strive to maintain. I think that's super important. And something that you hear sometimes, and that has been very motivating to me. I know it made an appearance, this concept, in an episode, is that every fraction of a degree of warming that we can prevent matters. We have these sorts of numerical thresholds that global agreements are aiming to avoid, but passing one doesn't mean throw in the towel and be done. And so that sense both of the urgency of doing something and the fact that we can. And there are, like you said, a tool belt of things, and people can leverage their networks, people can leverage their skills. There are so many tools at our disposal, and that emphasis is one that I hope and that I will strive to continue on.
And there's also this incredible opportunity for us to build something better than what we have now on the show, of course, but also, but in the world, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is a lot of conversation about climate change is escaping the worst impacts. And there's also the opportunity of, well, what can we build for the future that's better than what we have today? And that's the most important thing to look forward to.
Yeah. So speaking of the future, of the world and also of your life, can you tell us a little bit about what's next for you? What are you working on, and what can people look forward to from you?
Oh, thanks for asking that. So for the last several years, I have just been fascinated by what's actually holding us back, right? And actually accelerating action on climate change. And it just became clear to me over and over again that the political polarization of the issue of climate change is, I'd say, one of the top, if not the top things in the United States. So the fact that one side of the political spectrum sees the issue differently than the other side of the political spectrum. And so I've been doing a deep investigation into that over the past couple years. One of the reasons I left MIT is to really pursue this completely and more fully. How can we build better bridges, better understanding in order for climate change not to be a polarized issue anymore, and for us to decarbonize no matter what president is in office or who has power in Congress? So I could nerd out for another hours and days on all of that. If folks are interested in connecting with me on that topic, you can find me on LinkedIn. Who knows, maybe I'll do another show focused particularly on depolarization of climate, but that's where my heart is at right now, and I'm really excited to pursue it. And then speaking of, my heart, so I'm going to get corny here. So it's been just a privilege and an honor that MIT entrusted me and their team with representing MIT research and philosophy through the show for a public audience. So that's been a true joy to be able to explore how to do. The podcast is one effort inside of a program. And we've had a fabulous team. Erin, you've been my partner in crime in making this so successful. Obviously, Dave, too, on the show. And we if folks don't know, check out climate.mit.edu for all the different resources that we have. It's been just a true joy to be able to produce something like this and for this show. And I just want to say to all of our listeners, thank you so much for being here for the last 7 seasons. It's been such a privilege to be able to have you in my head as we've been writing these episodes and producing them. And of course, hearing from you over phone calls and emails and LinkedIn posts and everything else. I'm really looking forward to you continuing with us in the show.
All right. And to all of our listeners and to the folks watching this as well, since it is in video form too, thank you so much for being here. We're really, really excited that you're here. And please stay tuned for the next season. I'm really excited.